Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. This is No More Mondays, the podcast where we explore the human side of modern work to help you design the career, the business, and the life that you want to have. I am your host, Angie Callen. Today's episode is brought to you shamelessly by my book, Scary Good, Discovering Life Beyond the Sunday Scaries. It is a book for the burnout, the brave, and everyone in between. And as of 11 days ago, it is now available wherever books are sold. Head to scarygoodread.com to learn more. And now let's get on with the show. Today, I am joined by Dr. Camille Preston, a business psychologist, executive coach, keynote speaker, and author of Living Real, Redefining Success, Presence, and Happiness. Can you tell she and I are going to get along? Camille works with high-performing leaders who are trying to navigate the ever so common feeling that everything looks great on paper, but doesn't look good or feel good anywhere else. She brings a unique mix of science, lived experience, and research-based insights to help shift our lives without blowing it all up or blowing ourselves up in the process. So I'm super excited to get into this conversation and talk about success, achievement, and what it means to stop performing and start living. Let's do it. Camille, welcome to No More Mondays.
Fabulous. I think we have so much fun in the making, so much alignment and so much passion to help folks who are sitting on that edge.
We had an entire podcast conversation before I even hit record, to the point that we were like, we need to stop and actually hit record. So I always am excited to meet somebody that has a shared perspective and will step into my echo chamber and shout into the void alongside of me. And I was really excited when I was digging into, what you focus on. Because a lot of it is like some lived experiences and things that I've learned. And so I'm just excited as we, because you and I think both play in that land of high achievers ourselves and working with high achievers who feel like, okay, check. I mean, I've literally even had people say that to me, like, well, I feel like I'm checking all the boxes. And then they like, happy. Yeah. And they seemingly like wake up one day and feel like something's off or missing. And there's just a disconnect. And the thing for me is I actually find that is more normal than any of these individuals ever feel. And I want you to talk to a little bit more about what you've seen on that front.
Oh, time and again. People always come in and it usually starts session 2 or 3 and it's almost like a confession. And I literally want to be like, I wish I could have you listen to 8 other conversations because this is so normal. And then I say, let's celebrate this, because all of a sudden you're ready to start defining the life you want. You followed someone else's rules to get here and you're clearly a winner. Let's create what you want going forward.
Yes. That is something that I have. It's interesting. I never wanted, I don't think I was ever willing to, even to a subconscious level, play by other people's rules. I was just going to kind of do things the way I wanted to. Sometimes that worked out. Sometimes that didn't work out, kind of famously. Yeah. But I think that this is common, and we're starting to see this idea that like we have the ability and the agency to create a life that is more meaningful and designed for us. And what's interesting about what you just said is that it sounds like you work with people who may not have come to the full rock bottom yet, but they have this inkling that something's off. So I'd love to hear just even a little bit more as we normalize this. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're seeing there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say the vast majority of people come to me and what they want is more peak performance to get ahead, that cutting edge. And it's often a whisper circuit. They say, I saw what you did for him. Can I have whatever he's having? Can I have that? And what they're actually noticing is, his performance drastically accelerated because he unlocked something within himself. Yeah. And so they might see the peak performance, but when you actually help them unpack or go a little bit deeper, what they're noticing is he's happier, he's sleeping, he's saying no to some things and having more time for the things that matter. And so, especially for really driven, really smart, successful people, they almost need someone to help them notice all the ways they are listening outward and build their capacity to listen inward.
I think that's such a good realization. And we don't usually, it's hard to see that for ourselves sometimes, because as a high achiever, perfection and performance have been ingrained in us. There's also lots of generational stuff that I'm going to really keep myself from getting into, because then this will be a 7-hour conversation. But, and I think the inclination is like, I'm going to do more. I'm going to like strive instead of the opposite, which is maybe like slow down and go internally versus projecting even more externally in order to, it seems counterintuitive, but you end up performing better. I want to understand insights in the research you've done that tells us why that is so counterintuitive yet true.
Yeah. So for folks listening, my book is Living Real, and it came out of a season of grief. I had 5 deaths in 5 months. And in some ways that was a blessing because I couldn't not stop. Like I had to step back and calibrate. And what I started to notice is that life is like a sine wave. There's highs and there's lows. But what happens is we've started to shallow. We've refused to feel the hard. We put hard things in a box, put duct tape over it, tuck it into the basement and say, I'm good. I'll deal with that later. Not knowing that it actually truncates our ability to feel joy and happiness and delight. And so in the book, we unpack this concept of shallowing. What are the ways that you cut off parts of yourself or became disembodied, disassociated with things that brought you joy and delight? And we help people start to see the beliefs or the illusions or the assumptions that they have taken on. This is chapter 2. Like, what did you assume as a fact rather than something you've chosen? What is happiness? What is success? And we start to unpack that, which all of a sudden opens people up to start to say, I've never actually sat down and like had these questions about where is joy? Where is happiness? They can see the shallowing in relationships. They can see the shallowing in mental health. But then you open a space where they can start to say, who am I? Yeah. And like all of a sudden that has an incredible impact on performance.
Well, and I think that goes back to this idea that you mentioned something when we first started about other people's beliefs, other people's expectations, and things that are either projected upon us or given to us in those very formative years that we don't ever stop and assess for ourselves. Those are those assumptions or things that we feel are kind of the shoulds or the have tos, maybe, that we're allowed to stop and say, wait, does this serve me? And I think that's where the, am I performing for others or am I performing because this is something that I have decided I want to maintain can be huge, and why the going inward actually has an outward impact.
Yep. Massive. I had a faculty when I was in undergrad who I just loved. And I'll never forget when there's some event and she basically shared, I decided I wanted to she was pregnant. I wanted to raise my family with a religion. And I was like, And so she's like, so I went out and researched 9 different religions and I chose Judaism. And I remember thinking like, oh, that's so interesting. Why do we just accept the religion we inherit? Like if this is going to be a central part of your life, like that's fascinating that we all just inherit our guiding principles.
That is fascinating to me. And also I am working very hard not to go down what could be a social political rabbit hole about why we should all be doing that right now for the betterment of society. But instead of doing that, let's think about this individual leader, the high achiever who's doing the push through, because that's what we do, right? I'm going to do more. I'm going to fill the calendar. I'm going to keep myself distracted so I don't have to spend time inside myself. We're good at just putting our head down and grinding through the work. I am one of those. So I'm curious, what are maybe some signs that somebody out there can look for who doesn't have somebody like us in their corner helping them see the signs? Maybe what are little indications that this disconnect is starting to manifest and it's time to go inward?
It's a great question. I think what people notice is when they get a promotion and it feels flat. When they achieve something, then there's not like an energetic push, like an energetic response. Some people notice it in the way they numb. I'm having a glass of wine every night. Now it's 2. I'm scrolling on YouTube. I'm binging on Netflix. They're doing all these external acts to either distract themselves or to find a high. It shows up in racing cars, drinking, crazy hookups, Tinder, whatever. Like there's all these ways that we are moving away from what's true. And a lot of it speaks to our boredom about our fear of boredom, which
has only seems to have gotten worse as the distractions have increased, right? Attention spans are even shorter, which means our inclination to be bored happens even faster and probably more cyclically. And none of that helps when you're trying to actually give yourself the space to think about yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I've had a number of clients that say they vacation out of the country so they cannot get the self plan because they can't not do technology. And I personally, I love watching my kids without technology. Like the first 45 minutes can be painful, but then like what they come up with and what they create and like what comes out of their minds. They're in this thing right now where they're having a competition and who can come up with the worst bad dad joke. And man, they're hilarious. Like they're really
I love
funny.
it.
They should start putting them down. They're like, there's a book in there.
Oh, I love it. I mean, I am a math teacher's kid, and my math teacher dad was really, really good at ridiculous puns.
I lost I can't hear you. Let's see. There we go.
There we go. My mic just decided to mute itself. Apparently, Camille is just supposed to give you all of the dad jokes.
My dad was both my parents were math teachers. So maybe this is our connection.
Oh, we are. And my dad was like, he loves a good pun, loved a good play on words, dad jokes before, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I like to say that my dad was Pittsburgh dad before social media and Pittsburgh dad. So hi, Dad. But part of me wants to hear some of the dad jokes, but I'll wait until the kids publish the book. But isn't that fun? I mean, in a way, to tie it back, it exhibits just a level of simple creativity that I think that, without going into a complete rant about the dismantling of society thanks to social media, we've lost. Like I played in the dirt a lot as a kid, and I love the fact that I got to be an analog kid who started my career just as the digital transition was starting. And now at my mid-career, I am figuring out how I adapt to the future and modern work as we get into this kind of AI stuff. And which we're not going to go too far into today. But one of the things I want to talk about with you, because this is even more worlds colliding than both having math teacher parents, is one of the things that you talk about in Living Real is about work and life integration. And this stopped me in my tracks because this is something that I have also talked about in the context that like work-life balance is a total myth, because it implies this idea that you're going to actually have the scales always having the same weight. But that's not realistic, because there's different prioritizations. Like you mentioned, during a time of grief, being forced to kind of take that pause. And so I kind of have this perspective that the integration is where work and life complement each other instead of competing with each other. And I would love to hear your read on this topic.
Oh, I think it's true. There's integration, work life. I think there's also integration and partnership. Like sometimes you're going to do all the laundry and all the meal cooking, and sometimes they're going to do, right. Like, so it's all of that. I think the nugget you ended on there is really what I find in my own spiritual practice. It's like when who I am in my inside matches who I am at work, matches who I am with my family. And it's when you have that alignment and there's an even flow that I'm just Camille, right?
Yep.
And in that same, and what that means is that it reduces the code shifting isn't the right, but like having to be like, who am I here? How do I show up here? Who am I here? Where we're navigating that. It's a little bit different than your question. And behind it is the invitation or the gift or the opportunity to start to say, who am I? Yeah. And then what is the career that's going to really align and complement and allow me to be the best version of myself?
Yes. I love that someone else on the planet talks about this, because essentially what you just described was, I'm really mad it became a buzzword, authenticity. And I think people struggle with how to feel authentic. And it's because we are like a little bit shape-shifting. There's this little bit of lack of confidence in showing up at work the way we show up in life. And of course, it doesn't mean that sometimes you don't have to like have the context of like, okay, in this situation, I need to go be a more formal, a formal version of myself, but I still know who that is in this conversation. And I don't lose myself to the situation. And that's this kind of alignment that comes from being really comfortable and rooted and connected to who you are, regardless of what the title on the office door says. And that's the big thing in my mind.
So true. It's so true. And so I think for people who are saying, all that sounds great, how do I get there?
Yes.
I think the first step is to notice where you shallow. Notice where you like cut off parts of yourself, or you have to tuck, or you're really focused on like the photos you're putting on social media because you're branding an identity. So first you notice the shallowing, then you unpack like, what is success for me versus what was I told is success? And then where do I feel like I can be the truest sense of myself. And all those little gateways will open you into a deeper sense of happiness. In my, it's not a like, check the box, I'm doing this on Monday afternoon, but it's
Yeah, I love it. And one of my MOs, much like forcing the kids no technology to do dad jokes, I talk a lot about like escape to nature and go to a remote place where there is no choice to not have technology because there's no service, and spend some time alone with yourself and ask yourself these questions, because that's part of it, is giving yourself the space, both bandwidth, physical, schedule, all of the things to allow the thought. Because I think sometimes we're just scared of talking to ourselves, but it's the most important voice we have. And you're not going to know what is important to you versus what you've told should be important to you unless you kind of do some of this work.
100%. I'll plant a seed that speaks to how important this is. 1 in 5 adults are lonely on a daily basis, which is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Like, that's how bad it is to be lonely. And my dad, who passed, one of his favorite quotes was, the difference, he'd always say, sweetheart, the difference between solitude and loneliness is your perception of who you're alone with and who made the choice. Powerful, right?
Thank you, Dad.
He's such a sage man.
That is, I want to sit with that for a second, because it is very true. And to me, one is like an intention, right? Mm-hmm. I'm going to be intentional about being in solitude with myself. So, because if you do that, you're actually not alone. And the loneliness thing, I'm glad you brought up these statistics, because the statistics are pretty jarring in the loneliness category, because it's a little bit of an epidemic in it, because it's becoming greater and greater from what I've seen, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was the story I tell about the book is I had no intention in writing another book, and it woke me up at 4 a.m. one Sunday, December 8th, and was like, knock, 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 poke, poke, poke. Here's an outline, write the book. And I sat with it and I was like, 2 kids, 2 books, no thanks. I was like, done. But then I started looking at the data and I was like, wow, this book needs to be out there, because massive, massive spikes in depression, anxiety, loneliness, burnout. We're in quite a unprecedented time. And I think we need to get back in the driver's seat to start to say where we are. The other part that I'll throw in is, I have no idea why this book knocked on my door that morning. But what I've come to realize is, while it was a book about being with your full self, your heart emotions, it's really a book about how do you lead in AI. So when the world is truncating and shallowing and making everything ubiquitous, right? Expertise and knowledge is ubiquitous. What is going to differentiate you? It's living real. It's knowing yourself in this.
It is rooting yourself in your authentic humanness is what I think. And I also think that it's so interesting to me. I think about what's happening now as a very similar convergence that I experienced early in my career, when we had millennials coming into the workforce at the time of a great recession, when the digital transformation was happening. And there was like all of there was multiple variables of disruption happening. And here we are again, I think, seeing it into the AI age with the loneliness pandemic. But it's so ironic, because some of those things enable more loneliness. But yet at the same time, I believe the response to it is going to be like authentic, genuine, old school connection, because people are definitely seeking it. And hopefully there will be this realization that we need to be more human than we've been for maybe the last 20 years.
Yeah. And I've just published a bunch on AI anxiety, because it is real. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of people like holding on, trying to go faster, faster, faster. And I think the antidote is connection. The antidote is stillness. The antidote is boredom, right? Like it's fascinating. Actually, I just have to tell a funny joke for the audience.
Do it.
Yay. When I was getting ready to launch the book, someone in my life who's very intuitive and a little far out there encouraged me to hire this guy who I hired, and he helped me with my marketing, but he actually built an agentic AI system, which was like beyond my wildest dreams. I didn't even know what I bought I'm in New Hampshire. I'm in a little bit of a solitary retreat, and I'm having some conversations with Claude and like working on some stuff. And I had written a paper in 2020 about what is a business psychologist. I kind of coined the phrase and like put it out there. And Claude came back and was like, I'm so glad you asked about this, because that's a decent article you wrote, but you're so much more. Would you mind if I revise it and update it with who you really are? And I was like, sure, go ahead. It was like, 3 a.m. I'm such a morning person. And it came back and it gave me so much feedback on what the dots I hadn't connected. And then it said, a couple hours later, it basically drew the parallel from my first book to my third book and was like, this book did this book did this. And don't you see the connections? And I was like, well, I do now, but just right. So like, it's this idea of solitude in ourself and technology. When you put it all together, it's actually beatific, but we have to be able to have the space and the solitude to be able to discern the path forward.
Discernment. So she and we are. For those of you that listened to the episode with Jason Rates, my friend from Speak with People, quote, not at them. This is how Camille and I got connected. And the minute she and I met, I was like, I know why Jason connected us. So a few months ago, I actually went to an AI marketing conference and was the last day opening keynote talking about how to be human, which was a really interesting place to sit after like 2 full days of just heavy AI arbitrage. Create an AI clone video of yourself so you can get 3 million follows on YouTube. And it just all this stuff that I'm like, oh man, I'm going to be the one that goes up there and talks about being a human. Well, 2 things. One, it was like this welcome relief for everyone in the room that after 2 days of just this like, really heavy, not heavy, but really intense AI conversation, everybody was like, oh, cool, I could still be a human. And one of my 3 points about our human advantage is discernment. And I think it's really important in many different ways, right? We get to discern what we want for life, which is what we've talked about so far. But as we look at this AI stuff, we have to discern where we want and how we want to work with AI. But also we have to discern what AI tells us and what's applicable and what matters and what's real and right and wrong. And so that to me goes back to something you said a few minutes ago, which is like, we still have to be in the driver's seat of our lives, regardless of, what AI is doing. And in many of us need to be AI enabled humans working on purpose. And so some of the fear stuff could become an issue in the future, but ultimately it is that inward work that's going to help us connect and help us stay relevant.
Yes. So true. So true. It's so true. And it's we were talking a little bit beforehand. I was in a room that was like way over my pay grade in terms of like, I'm sure like, probably 70 Mensas in the room. Mensa is like super high IQ. It was a bunch of MIT folks and they were talking about consciousness. And we can get untethered when we get into knowledge. And yet it has to, if you do any adult development, the stage above achiever is really the ability to hold the complexity, the both and the tension and the discomfort, the stuff that we want to put in the basement, but we need to sit with.
Oh, and sometimes I wonder if we're going to be forced to do that more now, because we're not going to like, it's a similar counter to something we talked about earlier, that this idea that like we've shallowed because we've kind of been able to and been distracted enough to, but while it seems like AI can help us do that more, it also could force us into more emotional intelligence because it's bringing the intellectual, right? I had somebody on this show, his name's Manoush Agrawal. He could have very well been in that room, Camille, a couple years ago, right as like generative AI was hitting the mainstream scenes. And he said to me, and this was an interesting thing to think about at this stage of adoption, right? It was so early and all of us were skeptics. And he said to me on the show, he said, Angie, at the end of the day, AI is going to help humans have higher EQ because it gives us IQ. I thought that was fascinating. And now I am starting to realize that maybe he was onto something. And it sounds like some of what you're thinking is on the same lines.
100%. It's knowledge is going to be ubiquitous. What's going to be valuable is wisdom. Yeah. Right.
Oh, and there's a difference.
There's a difference. Yep. You're catching me on a busy week. I was at a dinner the night before, and it was again way over my pay grade in terms of, I was like, how did I get here? And hold on, I'm going to go back in my mind. One of the people had exited a fairly large pharma company, and they said, we need to go back to the ancient wisdom. We need to let medicine step to the side and go back to the ancient wisdom that our bodies know that we've disconnected. And this is very aligned with a lot of the work that Arianna Huffington has been talking with in her work.
Oh, well, and what's interesting about that is, we both live in the coaching space. I've seen a rise in interest, demand, and applicability of somatic coaching, which just reinforces that point.
And another, for people who are like hearing that, I often think about disembodiment. I lived in Africa, worked for the State Department. And when I came home, I saw Americans were like walking heads. It was like, there was like no body. And then I thought back to my time in Africa, where sometimes they were just like walking hearts with not the, like the discernment around financial, what have you. I'm making huge generalizations. And this idea that what we want is to have our head connected to our body, engage with our heart, and have all those pieces together, because that's where wisdom lies. And increasingly we're seeing it's not just cognition, it's intuition. And this is rising up in a lot of tech companies. They're saying, help me understand, help me explore what is intuition.
Okay, so I want to give everybody some advice out there, because now I think all of this just converged, right? We've got this idea of, and I didn't even know we were going to get into the AI rabbit hole, but that's super fun. Anytime you say future of work to somebody that knows some stuff about AI, it turns into an even better conversation. But we've talked about like this kind of AI human interaction part. We've talked about this idea of living real, being intentional, even going so far as using all that to like lead and perform better. And I would love to talk to everybody about how we bring this together and intentionally leverage the convergence of all of these things. So like practically, what do we do to use the assets that we have at our disposal at this moment in time, while leaning into all the things that make us human and unique?
Should have been at that dinner. It was all
I
about
wanted to be at that dinner when soon as you told me about it.
It was an ARC Fusion convergence dinner. I think it is so true. And there's a tension in this, because you can get so sucked into the AI, and it can be so captivating, and it's very complimentary also. Like it makes you,
if you're having a bad day, you got a cheerleader at your fingertips, literally. Couple keystrokes, it's going to tell you you're the most amazing person in the world, and that robbing a bank is a good idea.
So there's definitely some risk factors. And I think what Anthropic is doing to discern that is really helpful. And there's that tension, which you describe, of like, how do I use the assets? How do I stay human? And as competence and cognition increases, the convergence I spoke about was, how do we have the convergence of competence and knowledge with compassion and consciousness?
Yes.
And I think that's the place where we each get to start to say, okay, what is it that I'm doing to make sure I'm holding both of these with equal reverence?
And I'm going to tie that back to, it's almost like starting to like repackage things that we allowed to like separate and compartmentalize, right? Let's come back together, because the visual of like American heads walking around and African hearts walking around really grabbed me, because we know here in US society, we are very, very heady in how we make decisions, but there's actually scientific proof about how the rest of your body is just as good as, if not better, at making decisions than your brain. Like there's a really strong brain gut connection. And so it sounds to me like there's also this opportunity for us individually to really come back together and like tighten everything up, right? Know ourselves better, do that inward work, so that then we can go outward and be really intentional humans on purpose.
Yes. And just for people who say, that sounds great, I don't want to do it, there's a vulnerability in it, right? There's a vulnerability when we're deeply authentic. So gentleness, compassion, micro shifts, small steps, like all of those are really, really important.
There's this cute little word, grace, that all of us could give each other and ourselves more of. And I think this is a good, let's bring it all together into like a nice little summary. I would love for you to kind of, based on all these little things we talked about, which I want to now have 10 episodes on. But what do you feel like, based on the presence of technology, the opportunity that we have to really become wholer selves, what do you feel like it means to live real in this world that is constantly pushing us to do more, be more, and change more?
It's such a great question. And to lift up, to be able to respond to that in a way that would resonate with many folks, I think the journey, if I'm hearing your question, the journey forward is in finding strategic stillness. And we have a resource on our website on this, finding strategic stillness so that you can find your heart center, so you can reintegrate your full self. And when you have that stillness and that integration, you can actually listen inward, and you can absorb what's all around you, but you can also listen inward to your own inner wisdom. And so I think when I think about the living real and the premise, it's a solid foundation for understanding the external pressures that have gotten us to where we are in this mental health crisis. It's a like a what are the skills you need to develop to actually start to find this path. And then it's a, how do you start to embrace a world that you want, that is by design, that is the both and, that has the tension and consciousness. And it was written out of this time of a season of grief. Like it came from hard emotions. I feel like it's a manifesto for how do we live real in a world that's becoming, like, just even think about the title, Living Real in a World that is increasingly artificial in terms of intelligence.
One of the lines in my book is literally, we can't even age well. We don't even like the looks of our faces, right? And that is, there is a certain sense of beauty and irony in the fact that, what we're talking about is very much about living real, being whole, and being human, despite and in spite of the fact that the world is making it harder and harder to do so. But in my opinion, and I've yet to be proven wrong, we're all going to be happier if we take that route.
Yeah. It's health span rather than lifespan.
Yes.
And I can pull it. It's on a LinkedIn post, but I was on it because we have this, for the audience, we have a shared love of skiing, and I'm a telemarker. I don't know if you're a boarder or a skier. But I was on this chairlift with a gentleman I went to college with who I had come to know much better after college. And turns out I really needed to know him because I'm bionic and I needed a cardiologist. But we were on a chairlift, and my husband often describes him as kind of a Greek god. He has like no body fat. He I don't know how he does it. He's raised 4 amazing kids. Everything about Seth is ridiculous. But he said to me, you're going to live longer than me. And I was like, not according to my cardiologist, really. I said, is that according to my cardiologist? Which he laughed. But he said it comes back to relationships. It comes back to connections. It comes back to the humanity. Having real relationships and the depth of relationships is really not only what makes a good life, but also it contributes to health span. And that all is about living real and not getting rid of the Sunday scaries and designing a life that you want as you're really leading us into.
Good tie-in. And also, I think that that's a good way to think about the fact that, like, we used to think about lifespan when our lives were very different. And now that we live longer, it is more about how long can I stay healthy to have a high quality of life across that, which, in my world means don't wait until you're 62 and a half and you can get retirement to go do really cool things, right? Integrate it all now so that you have that complementary, equilibrium instead of this like competition and or. I love this idea of and 2 things. Hey, 3 things can be true, people. 2 and 3 things can be true. It doesn't necessarily have to be an or situation. And I love that as a way to cap off what has been quite a spirited conversation. This has been amazing. I love it.
Fun. So fun.
So you mentioned a resource, which I would love to give everybody. So tell everybody where to kind of find the resource you mentioned, and just you and your book. Where do we follow along with the amazing world and all of the things that you have to give to us?
Oh, you're so kind. My company is AIM Leadership, AIM Leadership, which actually stands for Awaken Inner Mastery, which is funny that came out like 25 years ago. And the book is relevant. So you can go to livingreal.aimleadership.com, and we have a wealth of resources. So we have one on AI anxiety, listening inward, strategic stillness. And we know that people are always on the move. So we are putting a lot of resources into Audible type sound bites that you can listen to on your commute, on your hikes, on your chairlifts. And we're really excited to provide you the tools you need to create a life that you're excited about and live more real in the day-to-day.
I love it. You got to know I love somebody that just referenced the chairlift as one place you might want to be be listening to things. I am a big fan of Blinkist on that front if you need some sound bites. But this is all some great stuff. And obviously we will link it to show notes. We'll put it here in the comments for those of you following along on LinkedIn, but definitely tune into Camille and all of this amazing stuff she's doing, whether you're a human or whether you want to be an AI enabled human, wherever you fall. This has been an excellent conversation to get all of us thinking about what it means to just be us in this place. And the biggest thing I want to give to all of you is a line that it either came out of your book or your content. And that is that you don't need more achievement. Mm-hmm. You need to feel alive while you're achieving. Yeah. And in my opinion, that's a life well lived.
So true. Enlivened leadership.
Love it. So as we wrap things up, I'm gonna pose one more question that I feel like could just kick off an entirely new episode. Very loaded for you in particular, but it is something we're exploring on this season of No More Mondays, and that is. I would love a few lines on your perspective on how you see the future of work changing and what we humans can do to adapt to it.
Yeah, you're catching me in a very immersive experience of that. AI is here, and I feel like there's a bimodal distribution. Some people are terrified of it, and some people are adapting it. And I think we need to be in the middle of learning to use it, learning to be in the driver's seat as we navigate. Head in the sand is no longer an option. And it can be an incredible co-pilot. You just have to make sure, not too dissimilar from parenting, you got to make sure that you're in the driver's seat, setting clear expectations, clear on the outcome, flexible on the approach.
Absolutely. I could not have wrapped that up better, but because what I'll say is what I usually talk about is like the bimodal thing. I think is 100% because the extreme is like over adoption. We're in the gold rush, right? So let's go throw it everywhere and anywhere. And that is a little unsustainable. And so I think this idea of we can't ignore it unless you have the luxury of being retired or within 2 or 3 years to retirement. If you're anywhere younger than that, we can't ignore it, or else you will be displaced. However, I think there's a way to decide on how you want to adopt it sustainably. And that was a great point.
The both and it's that idea that tension creates consciousness. Can we hold the tension of both and? That 2 or 3. Yeah.
Yes. Excellent. I couldn't agree more. And I knew as soon as I asked you, we could just keep on rolling with a whole other conversation. But while all of you out there may be perfectly happy to hear us talk for another 2 hours so you could avoid your Monday, I will stick a pin in it and say, I have a feeling this is not the last time we will hear the two of us talk. And this has been a pretty fantastic conversation. I'm so grateful for you and what you brought to us today, but also what you're doing in order to help humans live a more integrated, intentional life. So Dr. Camille Preston, thank you so much for joining me today.
A pleasure. I'll see you on the slopes.
Yeah, so fun. We're going to talk about that as soon as I hit end. If you all out there enjoyed today's episode, go ahead on over and leave us a 5-star rating because it's a huge help. And also this episode for sure deserves it. And also follow us so you don't miss out on any of the action. And if you have not already, go grab your copy of Scary Good, Discovering Life Beyond the Sunday Scaries today. It might just be a scarygoodread.com. Until next time, keep living real. I will see you next week for another edition of No More Mondays.